try this mic again. We did test it. I did unmute it. There we go. So here's the reality. In our world today, there are 24.9 million people in slavery. There's 18.1 million battling cancer. 2,200 people are going to take their own lives today. 25,000 people will die of starvation, and 200,000 babies won't make it out of their mother's womb. That's just today. See, we live in a world that is incredibly beautiful, but it is also terribly, terribly broken. And a lot of times we approach life here on the earth as if we do good, we'll get good. If we do right, we'll get right. But the problem is, if we've lived any time here on the earth, we know that it doesn't always work that way, does it? We all know someone that ate right, exercised daily, never smoked, only to die of a heart attack. We all know someone who invested, saved, only to lose everything when the economy collapsed. We all know someone who is kind and generous, and those wonderful traits actually only lead them to be exploited and mistreated. And so if we live life expecting and believing that God runs this universe according to the strict principle of justice, I think what we're going to find is that we're going to be disappointed and disillusioned. And one of the books of the Bible that I love is Ecclesiastes, because this book really challenges us if we have an overly simplistic view of wisdom and justice in the world. And we're going to be spending some time in this book over the Lenten season. And as we open it, it's important to note that the book actually has two voices. The first we might call the narrator. And he pokes in at the very beginning in chapter 1, verse 1. And then we won't hear from him again until the very end of the book, in chapter 12, 9 through 14. But he opens the book, and it's to introduce us to a second character called the teacher or the preacher, depending on your translation. And the teacher's voice will really serve as kind of the major voice throughout the rest of the book. But go ahead and look at verse 1 in chapter 1. It says, "The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem." And so the narrator says, hey, I'm going to introduce you to this guy, and he's got some words for you. I want you to listen to him. Now, as we listen to the teacher over the course of the next number of weeks, he's actually going to take us to some pretty dark places. He's going to challenge us with some grave observations that he's made about life in this world, or as he likes to call it, life under the sun. Under the sun. And what he's going to do is he's going to show us over and over and over again how the disturbing realities of time, death, and chance disrupt God's good and ordered world to make life much more complicated than do good, get good. Do right, get right. And so we're going to listen to the voice of this teacher. But at the end of the book, the narrator is going to come back, and he's going to tell us that while there is wisdom in the words of the teacher, we ought not take his words too far. And this is really important because it's almost as if the teacher will take us to the cliff's edge, and we're kind of going to be tempted to despair at times even. And the narrator is going to say, no, step back. Step back. There is hope after all, and he'll tell us not to jump. And so, again, the teacher is who we're going to be listening to, and he'll be challenging us during this Lenten season. And so what I want to do is just open up and start with his thesis, because he does not take long to get into an argument. Here in chapter 1, verse 2, he says this: Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. You ready for the teacher? All right, starts off strong here. Now, our English translation of meaninglessness, or maybe your translation has something like vanity. A lot of English translations, they don't really capture the meaning of this Hebrew word, which is Hevel. Okay, Hevel. And in its most basic sense, this word just means a mist or a smoke or a vapor. And really, the word's not being used here to say that life has no meaning or purpose, but that meaning or purpose in the world is temporary, it's fleeting, right? It's obscure and mysterious. When you reach out and try to grab onto it, it slips through your fingers. Right? What the teacher is really developing here is kind of a metaphor or a word picture that life on this earth is kind of like living in a dense fog. Have you ever felt that? Right? That a lot of our time is actually just groping around, trying not to crash into what's right in front of us. In fact, the first time the Bible uses this word really is maybe a great example of what the teacher is trying to develop when he uses it. It actually goes all the way back to Genesis 4 and is translated as a proper name. Anyone got a guess? Abel. First time this word Hevel shows up in your Bible, it's actually Abel's name. Right? And what does Abel do? Right? He does the right thing. He approaches God with fear and reverence, brings in the firstborn of his flock to honor God. And what happens to Abel because of that? His brother kills him for it. That is Hevel. Do all the right things, approach God with fear and reverence and wisdom, and end up dead in a field. That's Hevel. Can you say it with me? Hevel. Hevel. Everything is Hevel. This is the teacher's thesis. And what he's going to do in the rest of this opening chapter is he offers us what is a poem, but in it he makes really 4 observations about the world we live in that's going to kind of support his thesis that everything is Hevel. And the first observation is nothing seems to change. Nothing seems to change. Let's look at verses 3 through 7 of chapter 1. The teacher says, "What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again." And so the preacher opens with a question, right? What do people gain from their efforts on the earth? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, but instead of just saying it, he offers this observation of kind of the endless cycles of human existence. Humans, they're born, then they die. The sun, the wind, the streams just endlessly cycle. Nothing seems to change. And he's highlighting that really in the grand scope of the cosmos, my efforts really don't affect all that much, do they? And so with all the so-called progress we think we make as humans, we keep getting ourselves into the same predicaments over and over and over again. We as humans fall into the same sins that we always have. So the teacher's first observation is that nothing ever seems to change. He makes a second observation. Nothing fully satisfies. Look at verse 8. "All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing." And so he just notes that no matter how many beautiful sights we see or beautiful songs we listen to, we're constantly longing for more in our hearts, aren't we? Right? How is it that we could have a dozen streaming services, like with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of shows and movies, and every time you turn on that TV and you're flipping through, what do you think? God, there's just nothing to watch. Right? How is it that we can go to a refrigerator that has more variety of food than most humans who've ever walked on the face of the planet got to see in their entire lives, and go, man, there's nothing to eat? It's what he's noting. It's because nothing we experience on this earth, no matter how good, how beautiful, how wonderful, will satisfy us for that long. Right? Nothing on this earthly plane will provide us with lasting satisfaction. One of my favorite authors, Calvin Miller, he once wrote this. He said, "The earth is poor because her fortune is buried in the sky, and all her treasure maps are of earth." And I think this is what the teacher is trying to get at us, is you are putting your hope and trying to find satisfaction in things that are doomed to pass away. And when you do that, ultimately, you will be dissatisfied. So observation number 2, nothing fully satisfies. His third observation is that nothing seems novel or new. And so go ahead and look at verses 9 and 10. What has been done will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, "Look, this is something new"? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. Have you ever felt this? I don't know, in the age of technology, I'm starting to feel this, right? It's hard to get excited about the iPhone 15 or 73 or whatever we're up to. Like it gets a little old after a while. They say that every piece of technology that is developed before you're 35 is innovative, and everything afterwards is just unnecessary. I turned 40 this year, and you know what? I'm finding that that's truer than I want it to be. I love reading about archaeological discoveries, and one of the reasons I do that is that we often find that discoveries aren't actually discoveries. For example, back in 2016, archaeologists found this Babylonian tablet that showed that the Babylonians understood the Pythagorean theorem 1,000 years before Pythagoras ever lived. And at some point, that knowledge just got lost to humanity, and we felt like, hey, we discovered something new. No, actually, those ancient people that you thought were just unintelligent or whatever knew that well before we ever did. And that's just how things work. There's not really new or novel ideas. I felt this during the pandemic. So one of the things I did when we were in the coronavirus thing was go back and read what pastors and churches did during the Spanish flu in 1918. And what I discovered was the plethora of opinions and arguments and all the tensions were actually not that unique to our day and age. They felt that way, but they weren't. And so it was just interesting seeing how pastors talked about mask mandates or the opening and closing of churches. And I promise you, if you go and look at it, you will not be able to tell, save maybe the English that they use, if you're reading something from 1918 or 2020. It was the same stuff on both sides of the argument. People saying you're a killer or you're, a Marxist or, whatever it was, just back and forth. And it was just a reminder that, as the teacher says, right, there's nothing new under the sun. So that's his third observation. Nothing seems new or novel. Number 4, in verse 11, he says, nothing seems to last. So he says, no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Here's an encouraging way to close a poem, right? But let's be honest, few of us really know who our great-great-grandparents are, right? If I were to survey the room. Some of you are really into family trees, maybe done the genealogy thing, maybe even had the tests done. But few of us actually do. And here's the thing, our great-great-grandparents, they're a big reason we're even on the planet. And if we don't remember them or know who they are, chances are nobody else does either. And so, look, it's just a sober reminder that it's unlikely that anyone's going to remember anything any of us did during our lives 100 years from now. Sorry. Look, I'm actually not all that confident that a month from now, many of you are going to remember the sermon that I'm preaching today. Look, my experience as a pastor has taught me most of what I've said is already forgotten. And that's it. All right? I know so many people who talk about wanting to do something that matters, something that'll change the world, something that'll have lasting impact, something that will be remembered. But I think the teacher would actually just ask us, and what do you think that is? Right? What feels so significant to us at this moment will eventually be lost to the sands of time. And look, even the most significant, valiant contributions to society become paragraphs in history books that are ignored by high school students. And the teacher, he's got a point here. Nothing seems to last. And so there's his opening poem, right? His thesis, an opening observation and support. Everything is Hevel. And then as a support, nothing seems to change, nothing fully satisfied, nothing seems new or novel, and nothing seems to last. So say it with me again. Hevel, Hevel, everything is Hevel. So over the next several weeks, here's where we're going. We're going to be exploring not the whole book of Ecclesiastes, but some specific passages where the teacher is going to kind of look at different pursuits that we have in this life. And so we're going to look at the pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of achievement, the pursuit of power and wealth. And what the teacher is going to do is he's going to actually just kind of critique these. And at the end, he'll give an evaluation, and he'll say that they're a chasing after the wind. And so that's where our series title comes from, Chasing the Wind. And what we'll see is that he's going to use that in each of these passages that we examine. And so what he'll do is apply this thesis of everything is Hevel and some of these supporting observations, and he's just going to apply it to different kind of spheres of human experience. And just as a way of critiquing. And so I want to close today with a challenge and a caution as we venture into this book over the Lenten season. And the challenge is this, is to take some time and really wrestle with the words of the teacher. I love this book because it doesn't feel like this is something that should be in the Bible. It's what I appreciate about Ecclesiastes. It's so honest. It's such an honest look at the reality that we experience from day to day. And I think a lot of Christians are like, we want to avoid the realities that like we're still awaiting the fullness of new creation. And we kind of just want to throw the God card out there real quick with people when they're going through hard and difficult circumstances. But the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible is actually very empathetic to what humans experience in the brokenness and sinfulness of the world. And so that's what we want to do, is honestly let these words critique sit with us, because it helps us sympathize with those who are going through difficult circumstances. I think it generates in us a longing for more than this world has to offer. And I think it'll kind of give us pause to really look at what are we spending our time and effort pursuing in this life? And is that have any sort of eternal significance to it at all? And so there's the challenge, to really sit with these words and let them challenge us in those kind of ways. The caution is to filter the words through the person and work of Christ. Because again, the teacher can be pretty depressing. And he really does go to some dark, dark places. You get moments of joy in the book. But as we filter his words through the person and work of Jesus, we're reminded that Jesus has fused meaning and purpose into a world and into a life that would otherwise have none. Right? And his example even fuses meaning into the pain and suffering that we have in this world, because it's through his suffering, through his pain, that he disarmed the power and sting of those disturbing realities that the teacher will talk about, of time, of chance, and of death. And so Ecclesiastes, as we approach it, right, it'll keep us from being utopian optimists about the world in which we live. Right? It'll keep us from being that. But the gospel of Jesus Christ will keep us from becoming kind of depressing pessimists. Okay, so those are the things we're keeping in tension and balance. Ecclesiastes will recognize the futile pursuit of meaning and purpose in this world apart from God, and the gospel of Jesus Christ gives us that hope that we can hang on to. And that hope is maybe the one thing that's not like chasing after the wind. Will you pray with me?